Welcome to our weekly Friday news briefing. I'm Sandy Close, Director of Ethnic Media Services. Today, our topic is anti-Asian violence, especially violence targeting Asian American, Pacific American women. Since March 2020, the web portal Stop AAPI Hate has logged 10,370 reports of hate incidents, 16% of which have been physical violent attacks. And I'm not sure how many, maybe our speakers will tell us, have actually been fatal. Elderly Asian American women have been especially vulnerable, but we've seen from news accounts just in the last 3 weeks, 2 middle-aged women, one young woman and one more middle-aged woman, both killed in New York. Panelists will discuss how communities have responded. I don't want to say fight back, but because how do you fight back? But you try to move beyond. You try to address and move beyond the hate and specific strategies for keeping people in targeted communities safe. We welcome our speakers, Sung-Yeon Choi-Morrow, Executive Director of the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, Marita Etkubanyas, Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. Michelle Kang, General Secretary of the Atlanta Korean Committee Against Asian Hate, and Sasana Yi, an inspirational speaker and yoga teacher whose grandmother was fatally attacked at a San Francisco park in 2019. We ask our speakers to speak slowly for our interpreters in Spanish, Korean, and Mandarin. And we welcome our reporters, as always, to enter questions in the chat box. We will reserve at least 4 or 5 minutes after each speaker to take your questions. We are live tweeting today's conference and live streaming it, and we will send a video to all participants this afternoon, along with bios for our speakers and a summary of highlights of the briefing. So now, with pleasure, I turn the briefing to our colleague, veteran journalist, contributing editor, Sunita Sarabji, who will moderate today's discussion. Sunita.
Thank you so much, Sandy, and thank you to all of our speakers and reporters who are joining us today for this very important briefing. We start with Sung-Yeon Choi-Morrow, who will provide an historic perspective as to how we got here and why women are such frequent targets of anti-Asian hate. Sung-Yeon, welcome.
Thank you. To be here with all of you. So I will, so I'll just get started. I thought you were going to introduce everybody, but all right. Okay, got
yes.
it. Again, my name is Sung-Yeon Choi-Morrow. I'm the Executive Director of the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, the country's only organization dedicated to building power with Asian American Pacific Islander, or we go short by AAPI, women, to create a more equitable and safe world for AAPI women and all women of color. In part of my presentation today, I will be sharing my screen to share some images to help you sort of get a better sense of what I'm talking about. So I want to make that switch before I continue on. Sorry, this is, I'm not very good at multitasking. All right, share screen. There we go. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that feedback. That helps. So please just ignore my, oh, it's very grainy too. I apologize. Just ignore this image for a minute. I'll get to it in a second. But as we see the rise in coverage of the murders and the violence against our community, particularly Asian American women, we must understand and note that while the pandemic and the rhetoric of the former president blaming China and Chinese people for starting the virus and the pandemic may have dramatically increased the incidences of hate against AAPIs, it's certainly not something new. Especially as Asian American women, many of us felt living in the United States long before COVID. And my personal experience, I can say that as well. I came to the United States as an international student, and the number of times I've been approached by men public and in social gathering spaces who sexually harass me because of my race experience with Asians. Can you all hear me okay?
Sung-Young, I think that you are fading in and out, and I don't know whether screen sharing is
the problem. Okay, then maybe we should. Okay, then we'll just, you know what, we can here, let me stop screen sharing, and then maybe we can just pass around the slides afterwards. I apologize. I did want to have more of a visual effect as I was talking, but let me know if this is better. Okay.
This is much better. Yes.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yes.
Then maybe my internet is not cooperating with us today, so I apologize.
No worries.
And so, back to what I was saying, that, the objectification of Asian American women is nothing new, and the pandemic has just exacerbated this for many of us. Asian American women in particular experience increased harassment because we are targeted both for our race and our gender. As Stop AAPI Hate has reported, over 60% of self-reporting of incidences has been reported by women. And according to a poll that was commissioned by NAPOF, our organization, in early 2021, over 70% of AAPI women voters who voted in the 2020 election told us that they had experienced some sort of racialized harassment or discrimination between June 2019 and January 2021. NAPOF has commissioned a new poll to survey AAPI women and how safe they feel. So please, and the results will be published in a report next Thursday. So please be on the lookout or contact us if you are interested in receiving the press release and the report. Because of the vulnerabilities we are experiencing, I think it's very important for us to talk about the fact that the historical past of our country and how Asian American women have been treated. It is not a surprise that we are where we are today. So I want to start off by talking about, talking about the first Asian woman that was introduced to the United States. A woman named Afong Moy was brought over from China and is the first Chinese immigrant woman in the United States. She was brought over by a New York businessman who put her on display so that Americans could watch her eat, look at her small feet, look at her skin color, her hair, and the way she talked, speaking Chinese, as a form of entertainment, pretty much. She is really known as one of the first Asian women for many white Americans to have interacted with, and it has influenced America's perception of Asian women to this day. So from the get-go of the Asian immigrant women's existence in the United States, we were seen as entertainment or an experience to be consumed. And the slide that I had up earlier, that is a drawing of Afongway. And then we moved to 1850, several years before the Chinese Exclusion Act. There was a law that excluded women from East Asia traveling without male family members because they were assumed to be prostitutes. And then in 1883, we see the Chinese Exclusion Act with racist propaganda, followed by more racist propaganda about Japanese Americans during World War II, which stirred up so much fear of Japanese Americans that it led to the internment of Japanese Americans in 1942. And so I had a couple examples of propaganda that was circulated in public during these times. The way Asian women are portrayed in media through the past century also plays a big role in the way AAPI women are treated by the general public in America. We see the rise of the demonization of Asian women as quote unquote dragon lady, as seen in again, I had a slide of this movie poster. And on the other hand, Asian women are also depicted as submissive and used to describe in terms such as geisha girl, China doll, and lotus blossom. As you see, and these are not favorable terms, but rather a way to hypersexualize Asian women that makes American general public think that we're easy targets for sexual and other forms of harassment. And one last historical and sociological context I will provide today is the model minority myth that also makes AAPI targets of hate. In 1966, sociologist William Peterson coined this term model minority to describe Japanese Americans as for their success after World War II. Peterson, in essence, says Japanese Americans are successful because their cultural values of not causing trouble and good ethics. This idea of Japanese Americans was then applied to different Asian and Asian American ethnicities. The stereotype that Asian Americans are smart, hardworking, and will be submissive and quiet also leads to vulnerability and bullying, which many Asian American students and workers in workplaces faced even before the pandemic. Another way that the model minority stereotype was enforced was through a Times article labeling Asian American kids the whiz kids, as well as the character of Lane Kim, a Korean American girl, and her mom on a very popular American show called Gilmore Girls in the 1990s. These are some significant happenings in the history of the United States that create a kind of hostility and unsafe environment for AAPIs, especially women. When the various ways Asian American women are portrayed in the media may seem harmless, stereotypes about AAPI women become normalized in the general American public and can cause great harm to AAPI women, as we have seen throughout history, but particularly deadly in the past 12 months as we recognize the murders of the Atlanta spa shooting victims last March and Michelle Guo and Christina Yuna Lee earlier this year. As you can see, the history of the United States has always treated Asian American women to be hyper visible in ways that dehumanize us and completely invisible in the ways that make us fellow humans. I can take questions now.
Thank you, Sung-Yeon. You brought up a great example with the Gilmore Girls and Lane Kim. I think, more recently, the characterization of Asian American women mothers as helicopter parents, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, and how that plays out in school settings.
Sure. Yes, I think I'm also a parent of an elementary school child, so I think I have insight into what our community is facing right now in terms of what's happening at schools. What's really surprising, maybe not surprising, but very heartbreaking, is that the stereotypes that are perpetuated at schools that kids use against each other actually date back to some of the propaganda that was propagated during Chinese Exclusion Act, right? I have a friend whose 9-year-old daughter, Chinese American, got teased at school because she was eating dumplings at lunch. And kids at her school were teasing her, saying she's Chinese and that she eats cats and dogs, right? And there's actually a propaganda that actually says that about Chinese folks back in the day when America was trying to, fearmonger and isolate and sort of alienate Chinese Americans. And so while it may be recent stereotypes that are being perpetuated, I also want to underscore how these long-lasting propaganda and mindsets still damage, and are harmful to our children today. I think, this idea of Asian Americans being helicopter moms, especially, it's never about the dads, also is connected to this idea that we're dragon ladies, right? That we're ruthless, that, we don't care about anything else but, high scores and success of our children. And again, it is a reinforcement of a stereotype that has existed, in the past century.
Absolutely. Sandy Close asked a question. Could you talk a little bit more about why elderly Asian American women have been targeted in so many of these crimes?
Well, I think, if you think about it, it is because of the intersection of their gender and race, and then age, right? And so when you think about, who is most vulnerable, it is, right now, Asian Americans are being targeted, and from our community, it's largely women. Then, of course, then it is also the most vulnerable are the elderly women, right? Because again, the stereotype around who are the easy targets, right? And the truth be told, I think it's very much in the news now, but safety issues for Asian American elderly women is, again, nothing new, right? And so I think we're talking about it more because we're seeing it more and more people are talking about it. But, when you talk to your community members, your neighbors, this is not new, right? Being harassed on the street because we're Asian, especially as women and elderly folks, is nothing new. And so I think that's important to note, that these intersections of the vulnerabilities that make us easy targets, that, this perception that Asian Americans are least likely to report because, we just like to get along, and maybe we don't speak enough English to really navigate the legal system, those type of perceptions that are out there, that does make us easier targets.
Interesting. Pilar Marrero has an interesting comment in the chat. Pilar, did you want to just add your comment here? Pilar is gone. Yeah,
No,
there
I'm
you
here.
are. Yes, please.
It was just a comment, because I come from Venezuela, and obviously I've been in many places in Latin America, and I know that there are many Asians all over Latin America, and we have unfortunately, some Latin Americans call every Asian person chinito, like it means little Chinese. It's not, in some people, it's not with bad intention, but it is not a good thing. So some of our cultures are, without even realizing it, are, kind of perpetuate these prejudices and these stereotypes. And it pains me still to this day to hear that stuff. Now that I know better, now that I live in the United States for 36 years, I've learned all these lessons, about how we used to talk about certain things and how we shouldn't. So that's all. I was just something came to my mind.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that comment. I think that's, one of the points I'm trying to make is that, what seem, it's like, what's the term expression, death by 1,000 cuts, right? Like, it's not the one cut that necessarily is deadly, but it's the repeated and normalizing of dehumanization of Asian American women that has led to it being so dangerous for us, right? And again, I want to emphasize that, for many of us, I think the awakening moment after Atlanta spa shooting was that we all in some ways identified with that story because we've had these run-ins and these encounters on the streets most of our lives. And here these women have become victims, murdered because of those things. And I think that just really shook a lot of us to the core, and sort of, we all had this watershed moment as Asian American women who have experienced, sexual harassment on a regular basis, that, this is sort of crossed a different line, right? And so I think what we assume as, oh, that's just boys being boys, or, oh, that, like, those are just things people say, just ignore them. I mean, those are the kind of responses I always got when I would bring this up, right? Like, oh, they didn't mean it. Like, that's just, they were drunk, they were this, that it resulted in what we saw in Atlanta and continues to happen. So Pilar, I appreciate your reflection, because I think, we do need to be intentional about understanding origin of terms and phrases and the way we think about each other, because those all play a role in creating safe environments for us.
Sung-Yeon, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your comments. We move on next to Marita
Thank you.
Cubanes of Asian Americans Advancing Justice. Marita, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Marita is going to discuss strategies the community has developed to protect itself, as well as federal legislation addressing hate crimes. Thank you again, Marita.
Thank you. So first, to begin, I work with Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. It's a national nonprofit organization in DC focused on federal policy advocacy to advance civil and human rights for the Asian American community and to build and promote a fair and equitable society for all. And we have been seeing more and more people step up to take action in response to this increased anti-Asian hate that we have seen in connection with the COVID-19 pandemic. In terms of education and awareness, we now have more voices speaking out to help people understand the harm that racist rhetoric, like Sung-Yeon mentioned, and anti-Asian hate and harassment are having on our communities. In terms of reporting and response, while hate crimes and hate incidents are still underreported, we have seen more people reporting both hate crimes and hate incidents, some to law enforcement, but also to community organizations like Asian Americans Advancing Justice and our Stand Against Hatred website, as well as Stop AAPI Hate, whose statistics and data was shared at the beginning of this program. And on response, we have seen more people joining in demanding community-oriented solutions to public safety, which I'll get to in more detail in a moment. One prong of our work also involves intervention training. It has become clear to us that people are very eager to learn about what they can do as individuals to help stop anti-Asian hate and harassment. Back in the spring of 2020, early on in the pandemic, Hollaback, an organization that was created to address street harassment, approached us and asked if we would be interested in adapting their bystander intervention training to respond to the rise in anti-Asian hate connected with the pandemic. And since launching our joint bystander intervention trainings in the spring of 2020, Asian Americans Advancing Justice affiliates in Illinois, California, and DC have reached and trained about 150,000 people. And as we tell participants at the end of our 1-hour virtual training sessions, with completion of the training, they are now part of the community that we are building, a community of people who are ready to take action.
Marita, I'm so sorry. Could you just slow down a little bit for our interpreters? I apologize for interrupting.
That's fine. Okay, yeah. I will do that. Yeah, we are building a community of people who are trained and ready to take action and intervene when they see or experience anti-Asian hate or harassment. And then the last thing, which I will actually spend most of my time talking on, is our work on policy change. we can't rely only on well-meaning individuals to make changes in their own lives. We have to work for systemic change. And again, we've seen more and more people joining in advocacy efforts. And we will note that we marked a victory in May with passage of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, a federal bill that passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. This legislation was a combination of different legislative proposals, and it actually incorporated the Jabara Hire No Hate Act. And what does the bill do? It specifies improvements to data collection and reporting systems, including training for law enforcement agencies. These are measures that advocates have long been pushing for. It requires the Justice Department to formulate guidance for law enforcement agencies and others on creating online reporting systems for hate crimes and hate incidents, and including making those systems accessible for people with limited proficiency in English. Also calls for guidance on disaggregated data, which is key for our diverse Asian American communities, and also guidance on effective public education and awareness campaigns, which we know is really important. Another prong of the bill is for grant programs, which are essential because we need money to create these programs. And one of the bill also calls for the creation of state-run hate crimes hotlines. And here I will share that advocates are working in different parts of the country to have those newly created hotlines placed with state agencies that are not law enforcement agencies. And we think this is really important because we know many communities are reluctant to engage with law enforcement. And we also feel that placing the hotlines with non-law enforcement agencies sends a message that people can also expect to get other forms of support, like social services support, and not just resort to the criminal justice system. So, the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act includes many provisions that we think are important, but it obviously doesn't have all of the solutions that we need. So some of the other things that we think are important in communities, well, one, we need greater investment in our communities, including in social services, improving education, so that we can better create the conditions where people not only feel safe, but are able to thrive. And we have seen grassroots efforts to build better community safety and support spring up across the country. And these are things that we are eager to support. A longstanding prong of our work has also been to advocate that existing programs and services are more accessible for the Asian American community, including providing language support and creating the conditions where people feel that their background and culture are valued and understood. So for example, we need greater investment in mental health services and support, including counselors that both speak our language and understand our cultural background, including our intersectional identities as Asian American women. And then, we also need to rethink existing structures and assess how we can affect change to bring us closer to healing and justice. So there are lots of people working on restorative justice as opposed to our traditional criminal justice system. We also want to see more robust enforcement of anti-discrimination laws, including opposing efforts that result in the profiling of Asian Americans and other communities of color. And finally, it's not the only solution, but one of the things that we think is a good long-term solution to bias, discrimination, and hate is more diverse and inclusive education. So to that end, we are supporting advocacy to add Asian American history and lessons about historically marginalized groups into public school curricula, and also pushing back against efforts to limit teaching to a sanitized version of American history. I apologize to the interpreters. I am speaking too quickly. There's a lot of work that we have to do. There are great things happening in communities across the country where people are advocating for themselves and the things that they think they need to be more safe. We need to continue to build the power of the Asian American community so that we can hold policymakers accountable to actually hear and meet the needs that our communities are articulating. So that is something that we are doing and will continue to do, so that our communities don't have to endure the dual pandemics of COVID-19, right? Both coronavirus and this increasing anti-Asian hate. So thank you for, thanks.
Absolutely. Marita, a couple of questions have come up. First of all, do you fear an increase in backlash against the Asian American community, given that US-China relations are possibly at their worst at this point?
Yes, I will say that is one of the reasons why we spoke out against a lot of the rhetoric that the former president and other elected officials were using, calling it the China virus, Wuhan virus, et cetera, because we recognize that racist rhetoric and China bashing, many people conflict, that targets our communities. And we have also been very vocal about speaking out about anti-China rhetoric. One of the distinctions we make is that we understand that, and in fact, stand behind a lot of the criticism of the current Chinese government, but we must take care not to just bash China and by extension, Chinese people, Chinese Americans, etc. So we did, Mark, it was an interesting development just this week where the Justice Department announced that they would be ending their China initiative, which was actually heightening profiling of Chinese scholars, academics, and others in the interests of national security.
What kind of training can people do to protect themselves? And what do you tell someone who sees harassment and attacks?
Thank you for that question. I would, of course, recommend our trainings with Hollaback. We have both a bystander intervention training that teaches people really simple and straightforward tactics they can use to intervene when they see someone being harassed. And a lot of these are indirect forms of intervention that, if applied properly, will not subject you to greater risk. We also have a training for the Asian American community on how to use these tactics to protect yourself. So those are some things I can recommend. I also know that there are, there's the Yellow Whistle campaign where they have been giving out whistles so people can use them to call attention if they find themselves in harm's way. Some people are taking self-defense classes. I think there are any number of things that one can do, but I think a big part of this is just building your own awareness of what's happening in the world and the different resources that are available and try to avail yourself of them.
Thank you. And one question for me before we end. So at the moment, the FBI has its uniform crime reports, which come out every year, categorizing hate crimes. However, those are underreported because law enforcement agencies are not mandated to report. I wonder if AAAJ or AAGC is actually promoting legislation to make the reporting mandatory by law enforcement agencies.
So I know that there have been proposals floated over the years for mandatory reporting. Those proposals come up from time to time. There are different reasons why some people don't think those are viable. There are provisions in the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act that we think will help improve reporting and data collection. So that is a step forward. But as I noted, there's definitely still work to be done on that score.
Thank you, Marita, for joining us today. We very much appreciate your remarks. We move on to Michelle Kang, who will talk about the Georgia community's response after the Atlanta spa shootings. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for the invite, and I'm happy to be here and share the story about what is the aftermath after the Atlanta shooting. So I'm a Secretary General of the Atlanta Korean American Committee Against Asian Hate, and I'm also the President of Korean American Public Action Committee Atlanta Chapter. And I want to share a positive story of AAPI in Georgia today on how AAPI groups build a coalition among AAPI Black and Brown and immigrant communities across the country. AAPIs have become louder during the pandemic in response to the rise of Asian hate, especially after the March 16th Atlanta shooting massacre. We were furious and frustrated over the attacks and killings of 8 innocent people and 6 were Asian women. In Georgia, the first generation Korean Americans formed the Atlanta Korean American Committee Against Asian Hate on March 17th, the very next day of the Atlanta shooting, to stand up and fight against Asian hate and demand protection from local, state, and federal governments. And by holding a vigil on March 25th, the committee created a space where Black, Brown, and other people of color could gather to grieve, heal, and support each other for the first time in Korean American community history. The committee also held the community events why we need to include Asian American history in K-12 curriculum in May 2021 to dispel the misunderstanding and lack of knowledge that Asian Americans are foreigners. There is a long history of Asian immigration into the US starting from the mid-1800s. We fight to ensure our voices as Asian, Black, Brown, Hispanic, Pacific Islanders, and Native Americans are not forgotten within American history and demand that each student have the right to see themselves in their school curriculum. We also donated books written in Korean and English to elementary schools, which are highly diverse. In addition, in May 2021, during the Asian Heritage Month, the committee joined other AAPI and Black community groups and carried out Proud to be Asian, creating a safe space to share our frustration and hope to move forward the country to end anti-Asian hate and systemic racism. We also reached out to the community by holding the community events of We Are Together, inviting all community members, including young children and young adults, to make the community a harmonious place to live in. Different ethnic groups within Asian American community have united during the Asian hate pandemic and have successfully built a supportive relationship. On March 20th, 2021, at Liberty Plaza near the Georgia State Capitol, AAPI also held a march and rally of Stop Asian Hate with Black, Latinx, Jewish, Muslim, and other people of color and immigrants. On March 16th this year, to commemorate the first anniversary of the Atlanta shooting, AAPIs again will stand in solidarity with all community members to demand a stop to hate crime, misogyny, and systemic racism. AAPIs in Georgia have transitions from invisible to visible. During the 2020 general elections and 2021 runoff elections, AAPIs made a tremendous effort to elect representatives who will push the country forward in solidarity to stop hate crimes and to achieve inclusion and racial equity. AAPIs join political campaigns as volunteers to write postcards, phone banking, and canvassing. Statistics shows a dramatic increase in voter registration and the rate of absentee ballot usage among AAPIs. For the 2020 election in Georgia, AAPI is making a historical record, having 12 progressive Asian American candidates, including young candidates in their 20s, to represent all Americans. Throughout the pandemic, AAPI community members prioritize access to equitable and inclusive government programs and policies. We have demanded greater language equity in government documents and programs for immigrants and other non-native English speakers. In 2022, Gwinnett County government, where 1/3 of Asian voters in Georgia reside, will provide sample ballots and election materials in Korean, Mandarin, Cantonese, and Vietnamese, as well as Spanish. AAPI community in the country became a very robust community, especially the AAPI community in Georgia. And Sunday, January 30th, 2022, AAPI community members in San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Atlanta held Asian Justice Rally. And theme was Break the Silence. It was a national day of remembrance and action in honor of AAPI victims and marking 1 year from the day Vicha Ratanapakdi, the Thai grandfather, died from his injuries after being violently attacked walking in his neighborhood. The Asian Justice Rally empowered and inspired AAPI members while also bringing together community leaders to mourn the AAPI victims we have lost in San Francisco and nationally. AAPI in Georgia participated in federal labor agencies host online discussion on preventing retaliation and securing racial justice in the workplace. And also whole story education campaign, which is for discussion strategy session on the controversies facing schools and students in our country today, as well as the alternative to more comprehensive, honest, and empowering education in K-12 schools. The grassroots organization of Crime Prevention Committee has held Coffee with Cops since the Atlanta shooting to connect with local police department and sheriff department and ask for protection on individuals and businesses. And the police department and sheriff department integrated it in language services. When non-native speaker call the 911, they can provide the in-language services. And Georgia AAPI Hometown Security Series from Department of Homeland Security was held. And actually the Korean and other AAPI members are gonna get benefited of the National Nonprofit Security Grant Fund. On Saturday next month, Saturday, March 12th at the Blackburn Park, where Comfort Women's Statue built, AAAJ and Asian American Advocacy Fund and Korean American Coalition will hold the community events to commemorate the first year. And March 16th, the Wednesday, my committee, the Atlanta Korean American Committee Against Asian Hate, will hold the first anniversary Atlanta shooting commemoration at the Korean American Center. And Sunday, and to the Asian American Christian Network of Atlanta, remember, the name of the events is Remember and Renew, which is for gathering with Asian American Christian in Atlanta. So we're going to have a very, very busy month in March in Atlanta, Georgia. And we moving forward this country to stop any hate crimes to achieve the racial equity and racial justice.
Michelle, thank you so much. We have a number of questions for you. The first question, I think, and this is an important question, do you feel safer now than you did a year ago?
Yes, I feel safer because we raised the awareness of our safety and the protection. So we've been talking to police department, sheriff department, even the Department of Homeland Security, and they are watching over our community. So we have built the report system. And actually, I had a conversation with police department, the chief of police department, and literally asked for what is the number of the Asian hate crime report And there's not many, but the other speaker said there's just some culture in Asian community members that we just stay quiet and not to report, but we have encouraged them to report even any incident because the perpetrator could be the committed crime later. So even little incident we learned and to report to the police department.
Fantastic. Gustavo Espinoza asked, do you feel the solidarity of other communities in the face of racial hatred?
I think during the pandemic period, we made a connection among API community, and we reached out to other communities as well. So I think we made a change and made a transition. So we all aware of the hatred between races, the different races, but I think we all have the consensus that hatred has to be stopped.
Absolutely. Finally, Peter Sherman asks, what do conversations sound like in people's homes about the rise in AAPI hate? What are families saying to one another about these sad events? And how are they changing attitudes?
I think we are more louder than before, ever. And then we demanded, because we demanded a lot. We've been talking to the government entity and the officials, and we asked for the language access, and because the voting rights is very important for the AAPI to participate in. So we asked for the language access, and then that is the achievement from the AAPI community in Georgia.
Michelle, thank you so much for your comments. We very much appreciate them. We move on to Susanna Yi. Susanna is a motivational speaker and teaches yoga to help victims who have experienced trauma overcome their tragedy. Her grandmother was fatally attacked in a San Francisco park in 2019. Susanna, welcome, and thank you for joining us at this briefing today.
Thank you, everyone. Hi, I'd like to invite you all to take a deep breath, as we have heard so many things that might be triggering. So I will inhale and follow along. And exhale. Let's do that one more time. Biggest breath of the day. Inhale, bring your shoulders up to your ears. And big sigh out. I hope that helps you a little bit. And also, if you feel comfortable, I'd love to invite you to turn on your video cameras, because this is the community right here, right now. And we are healing together in this conversation. So thank you, Bryce. Thank you, Mia. Love to see you. Yeah, my name is Susanna Yi, and I am first generation born here in San Francisco, Chinese American. My grandmother, Yit Oi Huang, immigrated here in the late 80s, and she unfortunately was fatally attacked across the street from her home when she went for a walk in the park in the neighborhood that I grew up in and I still live in. It's called Visitation Valley. The date was January 8th, 2019. And this was before the pandemic, so we didn't get a lot of coverage on her story. However, I am super grateful to be sharing her story with you here. The young man that hurt her is named Keontae Gathron, who was 17 years old at the time. And this is a young baby in my eyes who is hurt. And I know hurt people hurt people. And so when I received the news that day, I was in so much shock and rage that I had to share on Facebook Live and did my own reporting in front of my grandmother's house about my feelings around all of this. Even though there is this horrible incident where my grandmother's brain was bashed, her skull, her face, her, broken ribs, she was in very bad conditions. But I also know to ask the question, well, what happened to this young man that caused him to do such a thing? He must be in so much pain. I know, because when I'm in pain, I also hurt people. And so my own journey of healing chronic pain, anxiety, depression has really helped me be more compassionate towards others. And I know that this is not just a one-sided issue, it's a both and, looking at it holistically. And so through my practice of yoga, qigong, meditation, all of this has helped me relate to my own suffering and the suffering of other people. And in the work that I have done ever since 2019, it's to hold space for people who are suffering, whether they are Asian or Black or Latino. One event that was called Remembering Our Tenderness, where we used yoga, aromatherapy, and sound healing to return to our bodies, because everyone here sitting in this meeting have bodies that are feeling right now. And we should get in contact with what we are feeling so that when we are out on the street, we can be aware of our surroundings and what is happening, so that we can either make connections or move away from danger. And so this event, which had about 15 participants, wasn't bilingual. We shared about our dreams and our nightmares as well. This has also led me to do another event called Personal Power and Community Agency. So really, my work is to give the power back to the individual, because if monolingual immigrants who don't even have the language to express themselves, they need to feel that their body at least is strong enough to know that they can either scream for help, they can run away, that they can be in a position of power. So in my yoga classes, I teach Cantonese seniors actually how to be strong in their bodies, using their breath, using their arms and legs to build strength, not only at the muscular level, but also in a mind, body, and spirit level. All of this is protecting them when they are out in public, to feel stronger, to know that they matter, that they belong on the streets, to walk with an air of confidence, right? And so when 2020 rolled around and the pandemic hit, I was thinking, well, Black Lives Matter is such a powerful rallying slogan. What is it for Asians? We came up with Asians Belong. My team and I came up with Asians Belong. And at this moment, I'd love for you to just come off the mic and say with me, Asians Belong. Yeah?
All right, let's go.
Yeah. All right. 1, 2, 3. Asians belong. Asians belong.
Should we do that? Everyone come off their mics.
Let's do it one more time. 1, 2, 3. Asians
belong.
belong. Awesome. I see a few. That's great. Thank you for indulging in this. And why is it important? This phrase is affirming. This phrase acknowledges that we have been seen as perpetual foreigners, but no longer. We are reclaiming our stories and our voice. We are reclaiming our place here. And we acknowledge that this is indigenous land, that we are all settlers here. And so how do we create a sense of shared belonging in this new place, right? And at the playground that my grandmother was attacked at, we are reclaiming this space by renaming the playground in her name to the Yit Oi Huang Peace and Friendship Park. I'll put the petition in the chat. And there was a question about solidarity. What does it look like? Well, a Black leader came to me, his name's Ronald Coulthurst, and asked if it would be okay to work together to rename this park. And he came up with this idea and the name, Yit Oi Huang Peace and Friendship Park. And that to me was a sense of belonging. He saw my pain and he wants to work together to create the safe park, to invest in a safer playground where no one needs to walk and do their exercise in fear, right? And so one last thing I like to mention is this quote by Bell Hooks, who is a professor of English, an activist. She has passed, but she has authored many inspiring books. And she says, when we choose to love, we choose to move against fear, against alienation and separation. The choice to love is a choice to connect, to find ourselves in the other. So why I hold on to this is because I see myself in young Keontae, especially when I'm enraged and angry. I have fire in my eyes, but I also choose love, and I choose to channel that rage and energy towards something beautiful, towards healing. And this is my work to create more spaces and events. One big event that we hold twice a year is called Move the Chi for Racial Solidarity. We just had one on Zoom a couple of weeks ago. And again, it's to merge different cultures with, merge in a way that we understand without language. We use movement. We learned West African dance. We learned Chinese Qigong. We learned about each other's history and culture through this wisdom that each culture has, but we need to share this wisdom. And so through this way, we build understanding and respect. And so let's do one more brief breathing exercise, because this is, again, my work to share wellness and embodiment practices. So let's place our hands on our hearts as a way to close, as a way to acknowledge all the victims and all the survivors, acknowledging my grandmother, Yit Oi Huang, whose name means abundant love. So carrying that in our hearts as we inhale abundant love and exhaling that out. One more time, inviting you to send this love out to everyone, including those who have caused harm, for their healing. Thank you very much. A little bit of time for questions. Oh, I love these Asians belong in the chat. Thank you.
Yes, so Susanna, you have a bunch of reporters on the call who would like to follow your grandmother's story. Could you talk just very briefly about the assailant, what has happened to him, and could you please spell his name for reporters who do want to follow your grandmother's story?
Yeah, so his name is Keontae Gathron, and he is currently awaiting trial. I think they are still at the pre-hearing stage. gathering evidence. And I know COVID has prolonged this process. However, from what I hear is that they are preparing to meet public defender and district attorney. The prosecutor are preparing to meet soon. They keep delaying, so I say soon, but I don't know when, and I don't know exactly where in the process. But he's been in jail for the last 2 years, and yeah, that's all I know.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Susanna. We very much appreciate your presence here. Sandy, final remarks?
Well, on behalf of Ethnic Media Services, we really are honored.
Thank you, Sandy. We need this. We need your tears.
We have spent this week with a remarkable group of Black and Chinese reporters led by Helen Zia and Paula Madison to search for ways to cover each other's communities with a more human face, a positive face. And today's briefing was so inspiring. Of course, I think it's comes with age. You become more tearful, but it does mean for me to express deep thanks to our speakers for helping us take a closer look at this very troubling, anti-violent, almost contagious, it feels like now, violence against Asian and Pacific American women. And I just want to thank Song-Yeon, Marita, Michelle, and Susanna for helping us understand how we can better report this for our audiences. Thank you.